Hi, I'm Justin Barrett. I'm president of Blueprint 1543.
And I am Ana Avila. Welcome to this Integrated Life, a podcast for those who seek to engage with life's biggest questions using the tools of the sciences with theology. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm excited for this episode. I'm going to be a little bit selfish and talk about something I'm really interested about in my personal life, and that is integrated parenting.
Ooh, fantastic.
Yeah, I thought it would be fun to talk about how we can use the principles we've been discussing of integration in our daily parenting. This doesn't have to be just for parents. It could be also for people who have some influence over young minds, maybe teachers, Sunday school teachers, grandparents, aunts and uncles. I think this will be helpful for anyone. So what do you think about that?
Great. I think that sounds fantastic.
Awesome.
Sure. Let's see what
before
damage we can do.
Before we start discussing parenting, maybe you could refresh our minds, and for the people who are beginning to join us for this episode, maybe tell us a little bit about what we mean by integration.
Sure.
Or is it something we pursue?
So by integration, we mean how do we bring our faith perspectives as Christ followers together with all of the relevant tools for knowing things well, including the tools of the sciences? How do we let them sort of be fused together in the right sorts of ways so that we can make good decisions, so that we can live more abundant and thriving lives, and so we can have a positive impact on those people around us, right? So the opposite of integration is disintegration, and who wants to be disintegrated? I mean,
That's not nice.
That's not what we're about. But yeah, how do we use the tools of the sciences in responsible, judicious, prudent sort of way so that they're assets to us? How do we treat them like the good gifts from God that they are? That's kind of our approach here.
Yeah, something that just came up in my mind while you were explaining integration is, why don't we do this? It sounds like something very reasonable, like should be something straightforward, like using all the tools you have to make the best decisions you can. But it's not common. We tend to separate the science side of things and the faith side of things. And why do we do that?
Why do we do that? That's a good question, because you're right. If we look, as people who have been listening may know, that one of my favorite sort of integration passages from the Bible is actually a passage that describes when Solomon gets wisdom, right? He becomes king after his father David, and then God says, "Hey, so what can I do for you, sir?" And Solomon says, "I'd like wisdom, so that I can, rule the people effectively." And then immediately thereafter, we've learned that Solomon becomes the go-to destination for people all over that region of the world who want to know stuff. So his wisdom isn't just about making sort of careful decisions about whether we should build ships, or who we should avoid going to war with, or whether, whose baby this one is, those stories, right? But also about the plants and animals and other kinds of stuff. They come to him for his knowledge of the natural world. And I like this passage because it shows that in that biblical idea of wisdom, there's no difference, and there's no hard difference between that wisdom and knowledge. They're all coming from God, and they're all supposed to do good work in the world, God's work in the world. God gives us the knowledge about plants, animals, living things, how stuff works, as well as people. How do they work? Their social relations. All of that's God's wisdom that's sort of infused into the natural world. And so the sciences, insofar as they're trying to uncover that, this is the stuff that God gave us so that we can make good decisions in his kingdom work on earth. You raised the question, so why don't we do that anymore? Why do we seem to separate those out? And I'm sure there are lots of, intellectual historians and other people who would have lots of things to say about this. My best hunch is, to boil it all down real quickly, is there are a couple of things. Mostly it's the fault of Americans. Let's be clear on this.
We blame you. Yes.
And rightly so. That when the whole idea of the sciences emerged, the sciences, a few hundred years ago, were not differentiated from philosophy and theology. Sometimes what was called the work of the sciences was called natural theology. Sometimes it was called natural philosophy. There wasn't a strong difference between those two ideas either. But the reason why I blame Americans is it appears that for various, mostly political reasons in the United States, certain champions of the sciences worked really hard to try to distinguish doing science from the work of the church, including theology, because they wanted to create space for non-religious modes of intellectual inquiry. The first president of Cornell University, which is the last of the Ivy League universities to be founded. It's the one I graduated from with my doctorate. So I learned a little bit about it while I was there. But it was founded. It was the first, well, the only of the 8 Ivy League universities to be founded with no religious affiliation at all. And so the president, that was a novel thing when it was started, that you wouldn't be attached to a church or to a denomination or something like that. You wouldn't be in the business of training ministers. You wouldn't be in the business of doing theology. Well, why not? And to create intellectual space and justification for that, then the first president, A.D. White, worked really hard to create this idea that somehow religious thought was bad for doing science, that there was this intrinsic conflict, and he sold it really hard. And he wasn't the only one. There were other people selling this idea really hard. And mostly it was a power move to create space for a university or for a new kind of governance. And so basically, in some respects, religious folks were being attacked for what they might be doing to damage the work of the sciences. But historically, at the same time, we saw a couple of other interesting movements. One was the rise of fundamentalism, which was also within the church then a shutting down of the sources of information that were relevant to the Christian faith, really a shrinking, that tradition doesn't matter so much, that philosophy and sort of reason doesn't matter, and the sciences don't matter. All we need is the Bible all by itself, as if we can read the Bible and interpret it without interpretive traditions, without using reason, without using historical studies. That was never true before this fundamental, well, never is a little strong, but that was not largely the picture of how we read the Bible before the fundamentalist movement, primarily in the United States, sort of launched. And so those two movements, we need secular universities, including secular sciences and philosophy. And, well, we need a church sort of cleansed of any input from outside of just the Bible. They're happening, they're rising and sort of playing off of each other around the same time. And then we get lots of people starting to use the authority of science to attack the faith as well, like Sigmund Freud in the psychological sciences, among others. And so now that's not an American problem. That was more of a just general Western thought problem. He's not American. But those sorts of historical dynamics then start creating these new narratives that say, oh, no, we can't get along. And they start playing out in American courts. And then American Christian evangelists start taking that all over the world and making it everybody's problem. So this is where Americans. Now, I'm giving a very sloppy, quick view of the historical kinds of stuff. I also think there's a more psychological and social kind of dimension to it. And that is the sciences are growing our knowledge base so quickly. Nobody can be an expert in all of the sciences. It just can't be done. Let alone be an expert in all the sciences and be, say, a pastor of a church. And so when we start treating the pastors of our churches as the only conduits for Bible-based teaching, right? They're the only authority we're listening to. They're the only people we turn to. Well, we've already given them too big a job just by doing that. They're supposed to pastor and teach and make executive decisions and figure out the parking problems and all of this other stuff all at the same time.
It's
It's
always
already too
parking.
it's already too big a job for them. And now we're going to add to them, and they need expertise in the sciences. They can't do it. They just can't do it. And so there's going to be a tendency for them to focus on what they know. And they've typically been trained in biblical theology. And so they're going to stay there, or in
Yeah.
historical theology. It's very predictable, it's understandable, and it also means that we don't see in practice in the life of the church regular exercising of those integration muscles of how do we use the sciences as good tools. Very few pastors can pull this off. And when, again, I mean, we've got a structural problem that says, oh, no, we've only got one or two people who ever give sermons. Well, then you're going to get what they know. It's kind of predictable. So if they don't know the sciences, you're not going to hear that talked about.
Yeah.
So I think there's that as well. I'll add one more sort of factor, and that's just how we're all educated. Most of us, when we go, especially in higher education, when we go to the university level, but it starts before that, we learn, the world gets carved up into these subjects or disciplines.
Yes.
And then we treat those like they're their own thing, and we get a major in one, or we get our degree in one particular area, and we often don't know a lot about the others. And so we've artificially carved up the world. We've disintegrated it. And there are all kinds of reasons why higher ed does that. Some of them are okay reasons. Some of them I think are really bad reasons. But the net result is we graduate from that with a compartmentalized view of the world instead of an integrated view of the world, unless we've gone to some very special colleges and universities that are really good at bringing it all back together again. That's my short. Here's why I think it is that we don't naturally think in an integrated sort of way. We, educated people, ordinary sort of folks, your typical farmer who hasn't been corrupted by these sorts of things, they're going to be a lot more integrated, I think, than your typical university graduate.
Wow.
There's a hypothesis somebody could actually investigate, though. So
that sounds very reasonable, and that also sounds a bit discouraging. It sounds like there's a lot of change and work to do to reverse all that history you quickly talked about. But I can't think of better people to do that than parents. Parents have a lot of
look at that
influence.
segue. Well done. That's right. With each generation, there's a new start.
Yeah, I mean, we can start planting seeds of integration in our little kids' hearts, and they can start thinking different about the world. So why don't we talk about that?
Okay, let's talk about those parents.
Okay, so
or other caregivers.
Yeah, of course. Teachers, grandparents, all of them can help. So if I remember correctly, you started thinking about integration and how it played out in your professional life in particular when you went to Calvin College. Is that right?
That is correct.
So I'm assuming you had children after that. So you started your parenting with an already different mindset about the world and knowledge and how it fits together. Is that correct?
I suppose that's right. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So do you think that made you a different kind of parent, or you weren't even thinking about integration in relation to your children at that point?
I don't know that I thought of it in terms of this concept of integration, but what I did think was, wow, there are some really helpful tools and insights that come from the scientific study of child development, of parenting styles, of learning, and other sorts of areas that are relevant to being a good parent, that we don't just have to turn to sort of conventional views in the culture. We don't have to just ask grandma how it's done. And we can use some of the scientific tools also to in relation to biblical wisdom on parenting to sort of get a richer picture that's tuned to our particular social and cultural environment. So it just didn't occur to me it didn't occur to me to separate those things. Why?
Okay.
Because when you're a desperate parent, you'll take what you can get, right? It's like,
Were you
I
a
need all the
desperate parent?
tools I've
You seem
got.
very chill.
Um, we didn't freak out for sure, but my wife and I, we did have our first. Well, actually, we had both kids while I was doing my doctoral study, so still in school,
Mm-hmm.
having the kids, and but it was great because I was also part of a cognitive and developmental psychology lab group, and so most of our friends were fellow students. We would go and watch Star Trek: The Next Generation on television with on
Of
Sunday
course.
nights and play board games and things like that. And they're all invested in how do babies develop, and so we're surrounded by people who know a lot about this. And most of the, actually, I think none of them except for one other lady were parents at the time, but she was I think she had 6 kids by the time she
Ooh.
got her doctorate, and
Okay,
she
that's
was
hope for
amazing.
me.
uh, she was amazing because a good developmental psychologist and was homeschooling a whole mess of kids, and
Wow.
they were she had a handle on it, so it was an inspiration. um, but yeah, so I was surrounded by a lot of people who had input from book learning, but not necessarily lots of experience firsthand themselves.
Okay, so you started thinking about how you can use those tools to help in your parenting, your early parenting years. And do you think it made you a different kind of parents of the people you were around? Maybe not at your doctorate, but I don't know, at church or in your family. Do you feel you approach things differently than the norm?
I it's easy to see in hindsight now
Yeah.
that yeah, we were pretty different. Um, I think a lot of parenting. Now, I'm going to speak primarily for the situation in the United States, right? It's been driven more by cultural forces than by what's going on in the church. I think, as far as I can tell, most churches parent just the same way as everybody else in
Hmm.
the broader culture does. There's not a huge difference there, other than we're going to make them go to church, or whatever it is,
Okay.
right? Um, or there may be a little bit of, family devotionals and stuff like that. But as far as the general parenting style, as far as I can tell, this is an area where those of us in the church have been really pushed by the cultural currents. And we've been pretty passive in accepting those, um, for good or bad. Some of those have been good currents. Like 50 years ago, it was much more common to what I would say is overuse what we call corporal punishment, which means
Hmm.
physically beating kids, was way overdone, and that it's not overdone to the same extent as it used to be. So that you might think of as a good move, but there have been some other moves that are maybe not so good, um, like permissive parenting, because right there's
Hmm.
another extreme on this in some respects. And that is this sway all the way to, well, kids get to decide everything for themselves because they're autonomous individuals with human dignity and all of this. We use high-minded language like that with a 2-year-old. They can't control their bowels, and you want them to make decisions for themselves. So no, they will tell me what they want to eat. They will tell me what they want to dress. I'm like, that's just ridiculous.
Hmm.
Um, the reaction against the what's in the literature called authoritarian parenting was a good reaction. We had a lot of that. Authoritarian then is the sort of domineering, The parents pretty much treat kids like cattle, and brand them, whip them, get them to do whatever you need to. And I'm speaking figuratively there, but don't respect them as individuals with wishes, desires, or anything else, or anything special about them. That authoritarian kind of despot image of the parent, right, gave way to the opposite extreme, which is this permissive parenting.
Mm.
Oh, I just want to be my kid's friend. I want them to know that I'm their friend. It's like, nah, that's not a biblical view, that we're supposed to
No.
be our kid's friend. We parents are supposed to have a certain kind of authority over our kids. And the scientific research on this is really clear that permissive parenting leads to all kinds of negative outcomes.
Mm.
And as kids grow up, they're more insecure. They have more behavioral problems. They achieve less. What we want is that sort of nice middle ground that is sometimes called authoritative parenting, where kids know what the rules are. They know that the rules will be enforced, but the rules don't feel arbitrary or capricious. They get it that, okay, these are the rules. They're here for a reason. I feel loved. I feel supported. And life is fairly predictable. The parents lay down the law. I follow the law. If I break the law, there are punishments. I get it.
Mm.
Instead of, you do it because I say so.
Mm-hmm.
That's more of the authoritarian kind of move. And the permissive sort of extreme would be the, you do it if you want to, kind of move. We don't want either of those. We want to, okay, here's why we're going to do what we're going to do. It's good for everybody. It's good for you. Here it is. And off we go. That move towards authoritative instead of authoritarian or permissive parenting, that's been important to us as we've been raising our kids, not caring whether we're their friends, because that's not what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be their parents, not their friends. That's another kind of important thing to us. Interestingly, something that's come out of some of the developmental literature, especially as applied to how to raise kids that will grow up in your faith tradition. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things that's really important, it turns out one of the factors that keeps coming up again and again, is the relational warmth of the dad.
Oh.
So we often talk about, religion is heritable. So if your parents were Catholic, you're likely to be Catholic. If your parents were Lutheran, you're likely to be Lutheran. If your parents were, I don't know, evangelicals, you're likely to be an evangelical. If your parents were atheist, you're likely to be an atheist. It's largely heritable. It's not perfect, but it's a very strong correlation. It's one of the best predictors. But within that, there's still variability. And one of the factors that reduces that variability is, did kids feel like their dad really expressed warmth and love to them?
Mm.
I don't know why mom doesn't show up in this more, other than maybe moms just are really good at that anyway. There's not as much sort of variability.
Mm.
So, but it seems like dads really matter. So the
Mm.
dad who makes sure that the kid does devotionals and goes to church and all that stuff, but is emotionally distant,
Mm.
it's probably not going to do the same kind of work as being emotionally present and sharing then in a much more personal way. This is what my faith means to me, and I'm sharing it with you.
Yeah.
So it's that really strong kind of emotional connection that's important there. It appears. But I'm rambling on. You seem to have questions in mind that you wanted to steer me to a little bit.
Well, I was going to ask you about what was the trend maybe when you were parenting your early years. I'm not going to say how many years ago because I don't want to give that away to people for them to judge. But but I was curious about what was the trend, the fashion, the way people did things back then. It was not so long ago, I mean, but back then. And how did you and your wife found the strength and the uh, I don't know, the courage, I guess. It takes courage to like, I am young and naive, and I don't know a lot, but I know this, and we're gonna do this, and it doesn't matter what people say. And they might look at us funny, or they might say things about us, or they might make comments. I don't know if people comment a lot in the US. In Latin America, they comment a lot, a lot about every decision you make. Even when you're walking in the park with your kid, if you are not covering them enough, they'll tell you about it. So I don't know. Sometimes we're not confident enough as young parents in our decisions, even though they seem very reasonable, rational, well informed, but biblically sound and scientifically sound if we're actually doing our homework. But still, it's hard to go against what is the rule. So, how did you experience that?
Hmm.
Do you remember?
Well, I mean, if I'm completely honest about this, I've, I understand what you're saying in terms of these social pressures. I've never cared much about them.
I'm so envious about that.
It kind of comes with being a nerd. It's part of the
I'm
nerd
a
thing
nerd.
is,
I'm a
oh,
very anxious
yeah, you
nerd.
are. Uh, but no, I think fortunately, one of the things that my parents helped me grow up
Mm,
with was the expectation that we would not be normal.
mm,
And I do think and I've tried to pass that on to my kids, not don't care at all what other people think. Don't be deliberately sort of antisocial in some ways. And, oh, here's the style. So I'm going to do something completely different just because. No, it's not that. If we are Christ followers, we should look different than everybody around us. So why would we expect everybody to affirm our decisions? We
mm,
shouldn't. We should be a little odd. There should be points of friction, and we just accept that. We don't go seeking it. It's not like deliberately, oh, Taylor Swift is popular, so I'm going to hate Taylor Swift. That's ridiculous. That's not it. But it's if there's a cultural trend that just doesn't sit right, it's okay for us not to be part of it. That's perfectly all right because we've got other things to do. We've got, that's not where our priorities are, right? And so I think that is an important part of how we've raised our kids. It was
mm,
important part of how my parents raised me and my brother. But my wife and I have chosen, we want our kids to know that their security doesn't come in that social approval from people around them. It comes from God first and foremost, and it comes from us. They're secure in that we not only love them, but we like them.
mm.
And we're not going to affirm everything they do because we love them too much for that. What? So that's countercultural too.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, nowadays, right? Oh, you're supposed to affirm everything about your kids. No, no, you don't. We don't affirm everything about people that we love.
Nope.
We love them enough to say, you can do better in this area, or I don't know what you're doing over there. Stop it. Uh, um, right. A loving person wants the best for you, not just for you to be blandly happy.
Mm,
Oh, there's one that just drives me crazy. You hear so often in our culture today, I just want my kids to be happy. You've given up as a parent if that's your mantra.
mm,
Sorry, I really feel that strongly about that one. I just want my kids to be happy. You're not doing your job, parents, or
mm.
grandparents, or whomever. Happiness is not the goal of parenting. You should want to raise up good people who are going to have good, full, abundant lives. Sometimes that means they're not going to be happy
Yeah.
because life can be challenging. It can be hard. If you're invested in happiness above all else, then you do what ridiculous people do these days, which is try to plow all of that's the term that's used, right? Plow, snowplow parenting and stuff, plow all of the obstacles out of their way. Well, then
Mm-hmm.
they never have challenges. They never grow. They don't develop character right. They develop entitlement and selfishness and everything else. They become what we used to call spoiled brats because you were so worried about them being happy instead of being good people. Um, so I moved very quickly from uh, from one point to another. I didn't worry about looking like everybody else because I didn't expect it. I think that's an important place to begin with your parenting, and so that you aren't pushed around by soldiers, by the gossipers and the critics and so forth. Should we take seriously when other people have good input? Absolutely. Right. We're not going to get everything right as young parents. We're going to do dumb stuff. And it's important to at least listen to people we trust, um, and not get all defensive about it. That's the other thing that has become sort of a cultural trend in parenting too, is don't tell me how to raise my kids.
Hmm.
That's the sort of what you're experiencing in Latin America is everybody tells you how to raise your kids. In the United States, it's the don't you dare try to tell me
Yeah,
how to raise
yeah.
my kids. Even the, well, you're turning your kid into a monster and we all see it, but you're so defensive
Hmm.
about your parenting that you won't listen to anybody else. Well, that's a problem on the other extreme. Um, so we're supposed to seek wise counsel. That's a biblical principle. That's all over the Proverbs, especially, right? Seek wise counsel. Don't be a fool. Listen, learn what you don't know. That's good stuff. But we need to also have the confidence once we know the good stuff to stick to it, even if it's countercultural. Um,
Yeah.
so,
Well, I
you
think
know,
you've mentioned this here and there about our goal is to raise good kids, good people who love God and love others. Um, how do we know if we are getting to that goal? What would you say about that? Because as you've said, we are young and we are naive in some ways, and we are trying stuff and failing, and we have to correct our course and things like that. But what are the signs in ourselves, in our children, in our family life that we can look at and say, okay, we are not perfect by any means, but we're moving in the right direction? Um, what can we see in our children? What do they gain when they have an integrated childhood because their parents are integrated?
uh, I would use the ninefold fruit of the spirit as a benchmark. So, do my kids seem to be loving? Are they joyful? Are they kind? Are they do they have self control? And can they exercise patience appropriately and so forth? Right. We want to see growth in those. Um, Self control is a great example. Right. That's right there in the middle of the list of in Galatians. Right. Of what the fruit, what the features of the fruit of the spirit are. Um, and it's a tough one for kids, right? Because we now can know things like, yeah, their prefrontal cortex is a little bit sort of poorly developed. The connections between their emotion centers in their brain and their prefrontal cortex, they're kind of shaky, they're developing. So it's hard until they get out of their teenage years, for a lot of people to really self-regulate well. What tools can I give them to self-regulate? How can I, as a parent, help them maximize their self-control? And am I seeing signs that, yeah, they're starting to do that? Um, One of the ways, to be very specific, is we sometimes see kids who are about to lose it and they don't lose it. Well, do you praise those moments or do you criticize them for almost losing it?
Hmm.
Right? Or do we recognize, I know this made you very angry, because it might be at me, right? I know what I told you made you very angry. And while I don't like that, I want to acknowledge and praise you for you locked it down. You controlled that. You didn't turn it into an outburst, or you didn't throw a fit. Good job. Um, Now that's a little bit older kids usually, but still, I mean, it's sort of recognizing these struggles that kids are facing to exercise spiritual fruit. and affirming and growing that, helping to cultivate that. So if I see those signs, I think we're on the right track. And whereas the spiritual fruit really are gifts from God, they are gifts that can be invested and cultivated, right? That's that interesting tension we see throughout the Bible, right? As God gives us all these good gifts and he expects us to grow them and use them. And so we're sort of responsible for them, and yet they're gifts at the same time.
Yeah. That's very important. I think we so often reduce parenting to providing shelter and food and education, opportunities maybe, to having a good time, which all of those things are important, but we forget that side of things, the part of helping them to develop the fruits of the spirit, a godly character. We think those things are going to come out naturally out of them, as if they come naturally out of us. um and of course, as you said, in a way they're gifts. If we have a new heart and we have the Holy Spirit within us, he's doing his work in us. But the Bible again and again tells us about how we have to work and grow in holiness, and develop those gifts that God has given us, as you said. So regarding those specific things we can use and we can do to help our children develop those gifts and grow in character, what are some specific practical things you did that you are really glad you did, and what are some things you wish you could have done better as a parent?
Ooh. One thing that we did very consistently, I should be clear for the record. Of course, my wife gets the majority of the credit, but I'm not going to be one of those dads who says, "Oh, it was all her," because it wasn't. There were 5 years I was the primary caregiver. Actually, I homeschooled my kids for a couple of years too. So I was, I think, a pretty involved dad, but she still gets the majority of the credit, I think. One thing that we did, and this actually comes out of basic intro psychology kind of stuff. So if you take a kid to a grocery store, or, a big Walmart supercenter or something, or any kind of store, it is common to see it's common to see kids throwing fits and asking for things. More common than we'd like it to be. What's going on there? Well, there's all kinds of cool stuff around that's been arranged in such a way that it's really attractive to us and to them, and they want it. And they've been spending a lot of time in front of television, so they recognize like these characters on cereal boxes or on snack foods or things like that. They're all of these tie-ins, right, to the what they see on TV that they have a positive association with. So now they want that thing, even though that thing is probably nutritionally just poison to them, but they don't know that. And lots of parents say, "Okay, if you calm down, I'll give you this thing." But notice what you've just done in that moment. You've negotiated with a terrorist. And it's a good parenting policy to not negotiate with terrorists, right? Because what you've said is, if you don't embarrass me in this store by throwing a big fit, I will give you what you want. You are now holding me hostage. Do we want to give that power to a 2-year-old? Really? I don't think we do. I think that's imprudent parenting. And what it does, to use the sort of psychology of this, is it creates a reward system or a reinforcement schedule, that the kid gets a certain reinforcement for behaving in a certain kind of way. And well, then that's going to increase that kind of behavior. What behavior? Throwing a fit.
Yeah.
We're actually encouraging them to throw fits by rewarding them for throwing fits. So what did we do? Instead, you got to do something else. And one of our philosophy on going to the store was, unless we have told them in advance that we are getting something in particular for them, we're not getting anything special for them. They can ask until they're blue in the face, and they're not going to get it. It does not matter how well behaved they are, or what, or monstrous they are. They're not getting it because that's not what we're going for. We're
Mm-hmm.
going to get X, Y, and Z. So our yes is our yes, and our no is our no.
Mm-hmm.
Again, very biblical kind of principle. That's that authoritative kind of parenting. It's clear. Now, parents, of course, get to choose what they want to do, but they're not going to do it because the kid is throwing a fit or being unruly. They might decide, oh, this is something I want my kid to have, and I'm going to make it a present. That's okay, but it can't be their idea. It's got to be your idea.
Mm-hmm.
We What we would do sometimes, if typically an important parenting tip in this world, you go lots of places with kids now, always be prepared, bring stuff for them to do so that coloring books are really easy, or just a pad of paper and some crayons or something to keep them entertained when they're a little older, picture books and things like that. Something that they can do that will distract them. No, not your cell phone, not a tablet. That is not good for little kids' brains. But these other things are, and they're perfectly good to keep them sort of distracted and occupied. Sometimes that's hard. It is hard for a kid to, go around a big store in the shopping cart with crayons and things because they're moving, they're going to drop things. I know it can be a lot. So sometimes we would do things like, all right, here's the deal. We're going into the store. You can pick out one thing to hold or to look at while you're in the store, and then we put it back before we leave. Usually they're perfectly happy with that. Oh, I want to look at this book. Fine, you look at that book, and then we return it because this is where it lives.
Mm-hmm.
Or I want to hold that toy. That's great. You can hold that toy in the store. And then before we leave, it goes back to where it lives on that shelf. That's where it lives. You can enjoy it while we're here. They know the rules. They didn't throw fits because they knew they're not going to get it by throwing a fit, but they get to interact with something that they're attracted to in the store. Now, I mentioned that one of the reasons stores are dangerous is because they're seeing characters from cartoons and things like that on products, and then that makes them want those things. Well, of course, another thing that we did throughout their childhood was we strictly limited how much screen time they got so that we minimized the amount of that stuff happening.
Yeah.
So they didn't know all kinds of characters, and we're like, who is that? Why do you want that? What have you been watching? Because there was never any unsupervised, sitting in front of screens, numbing their minds for hours on end. We just didn't do that. And that removes a lot of that kind of energy around, oh, I want this, and I want this, and I want this. Marketers are banking on their kids manipulating you.
Yeah.
And so there's that. So that's a really concrete thing, around sort of navigating that environment. And what that does is it helps train up that self-control as well in kids. They sort of know the rules of the game. Another concrete thing was if we sort of decided to pick a fight with a kid, I mean, in the sense of here's what you're going to wear, or here's where we're going and what we're going to do it. We never lost. Never lose a fight to a kid. Lots of parents, some of our dear friends who, we would go to church with and everything else, they would say things like, totally understandable parenting things like, well, you got to pick your battles, meaning my kid looks a mess at church because I just didn't have it in me to win this battle. I admit some kids are harder than others. I kind of feel like I had one of each. One kid was really easygoing. He didn't want to fight about anything. He doesn't care much about anything. And he hasn't changed a whole lot, it turns out. That's just his temperament. And the other one, she had strong opinions from the very beginning. And she had some good energy to make her opinions known. So she was a little harder, but we had to decide that no, once we've taken a stand, we cannot back down anymore. Again, if we change our mind on something, it has to be clear why we've done it. It's not because she's thrown a fit.
Yeah.
You have to win every battle. Once you win every battle, when they're, I'm of course figuratively battle, we're not actually, full on fighting, but especially in those first few years of life, then they just stop fighting because they know there's no point in it.
Yeah.
But if every once in a while they win, that's called a random reinforcement schedule. And it's the same kind of reinforcement schedules that slot machines and gambling kinds of things use to addict people to those. Because it turns out those random reinforcements are create behavioral patterns that are hardest to, the jargon is, extinguish. They're hardest to put out because you never know. This might be the time I win. So I'm going to keep going. So always, if you've picked a battle, always win it as a parent. Keep them entertained, through non-screen means is a good strategy. And, being very clear about what the rules are and not backing down when you're in those sort of shopping impulse kinds of situations. It helps teach the kids too about we don't impulse shop. Well, that's a good life habit just as well. So there are lots of things that you're modeling as you're interacting with kids. And sometimes you end up feeling like, well, gee, I would like to be more generous with my kids, or I'd like to do them to, think I'm great because I bought them these cool stuff. But, you need to remind yourself you're not their grandparent. You're their parent. Unless you are their grandparent, then, well, mess them up and send them back home.
No, don't mess them up. Please help us.
Getting grandparents, you've got to help too. So
yes,
stop
please.
with the whole, I never gave you Coca-Cola as a baby, but now I'm going to give it to my grandchildren as a baby. Stop that nonsense.
Stop.
You still have responsibilities to raise your grandkids well, because you want them to turn into good, decent,
healthy
people that you actually like. Yes. And healthy people that you like when they grow up.
Please.
For the sake of all of us, please.
Yeah. And I think one important thing to note is that picking our battles, which means every battle we win, doesn't mean we don't admit when we were wrong in the stance we took on the battle. Sometimes we go back and say, hey, I had set these rules and I made a mistake. I did that with video games. But because we had very strict rules about screen time around video games. And then I realized that my boundary should have been no video games at all. And I went back to my kids and I sat them down and I told them, like, hey kids, we have these rules that I made up, but I realized now that those weren't the right rules for us. So we need to make some changes. And I'm sorry, this is disappointing. I made a mistake. And that is also a way we model humbleness. And that's something our children need to see too.
Absolutely. That's right. No, that's a really good illustration. And sometimes we make other kinds of mistakes too. It's like, I think you said it nicely. So I just want to highlight it, is that, yes, we need to be able to admit when we got something wrong in front of our kids. We need to be able to apologize to our kids when we really have wronged them in some way, because we will. And it's okay to apologize to kids. I am not of that camp that, never apologize. No, it's a sign of weakness. No, it's not. It's a sign of strength that you can apologize. Now, you're not going to apologize for the wrong things, and you're not going to apologize for, I think there's cheap apology too, that we don't really mean. And it leaks into our language too, where I'm sorry that you're sad about X, but da da da. Well, you're not really apologizing for anything. You're saying, I acknowledge that you're sad. And that wasn't my aim. But when we didn't screw up, don't apologize. But if you did, be able to apologize. What you don't do, my point was, is you don't pivot in the middle of a fight because they're fighting. And you're like, I just can't do this anymore. You win, basically. It's like, no, sorry, parents. Parenting is hard. It takes energy, and your kids are worth it for you to keep at it and not give up. Now, you asked me for something that I wish I would have done better. Um, like humans do, I'm finding that harder to come up with a particular example. If you ask my kids,
Maybe I
though,
should have these kids. Yeah.
I'm sure they would come up with all kinds of things. Um, so that one, I'm not as sure. Now, I do know that when I was homeschooling my kids, um, we did get on each other's nerves a little bit.
Mm.
These were good years. They reflect on the homeschooled years as some of the best years of their childhood, but at the same time, they knew it was hard on everybody involved.
Mm.
Mostly be in their sort of subject matter differences. So yes, there were tears shed for one child who's pretty good with the math stuff. When it came to reading assignments and stuff, there were tears shed. For the one who is really good on that side of things and not so good on math side, there were tears shed. And yes, reportedly, accurately, I would sometimes say to my wife, these kids of yours just refuse to learn. I certainly wished I would have had more patience
Mm.
for them and expressed more patience and had more creativity for how can I help them sort of learn this stuff. But what we did learn was maybe we shouldn't do this for a long time. It
5
was
years is
fine
good
for a
enough.
while, but maybe we need to find a different way to educate them.
Well, thank you, Justin, for all your insights, your experience. It's very valuable and I think encouraging for all of us who are starting our parenting journey. And it gives us a lot of things to think about. How can we can do better and make sure we're integrating our biblical knowledge with our scientific knowledge to help our kids be the kids God wants them to be. So I'm sure people will have questions, and I'm sure we can spend another episode talking about this more practical stuff. So I'm sure we'll come back to this topic soon enough.
I hope so. You're right. There's a lot here. But thanks
Well,
for the chance to talk about this.
yeah. Thank you all for listening. Leave your comments, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.